The Scilly Isles is a very complicated landscape, created by human interaction over thousands of years, like a giant patchwork quilt, and in every patch there's a secret to be discovered.
In this series, I'm visiting some of Britain's most outstanding areas of natural beauty to explore the fascinating wildlife that has made these places their home. This time, I've come to the remote Isles of Scilly. The collection of islands offers an enormous array of species, but they're small in size. While I'm here, I hope to find a beetle with an extraordinary life cycle, encounter migrating birds on their first stop-off en route to the mainland.
The Scilly's are a bit like a service station on a motorway.
Very much so, yeah. In, fuel up, and move on again.
And seek out a favourite of mine, the hedgehog. The Isles of Scilly lie 28 miles off the Cornish coast. There are 5 inhabited islands and around 140 rocky islets. The population is just over 2,000, and my first stop is St Mary's.
Isn't this incredible? This is what the Scillies are really famous for, these wildflower meadows. There's an incredible diversity of species to be found here. Plants grow here that don't grow on the mainland, at least not yet.
The islands are fed by the warming Gulf Stream, and with one of the mildest climates in the UK, they're a magnet for migrant species and introduced exotic plants alike.
Wow, it's beautiful, isn't it? The Isles of Scilly really are spectacular, and they're very interesting. It doesn't feel like Britain at all. In fact, if I close my eyes and just smell the air here, it reminds me of islands that you find in the southern part of the Pacific Ocean. There's a different feeling here. And that's probably made up because of all the vegetation that's here, some strange plants. Look at this tree here. You wouldn't find that on the mainland. Very unusual. You can see it in flower there. This is called Pittosporum, and this comes from New Zealand. And then here, look at this succulent. This is the Hottentot fig that comes from South Africa. It really is an astonishing tapestry of strange species that have come here by all different means. And with many of these plants came interesting invertebrates.
Insects are vital to the ecology of the Scillies. 6 species of bumblebee are found here, and a staggering 568 different beetles have been recorded on the islands. Resident birds, like this song thrush, make the most of the abundant feast and tend to be larger than birds on the mainland.
Now that's what I grew up calling a hedge sparrow. People have given them new names now, dunnocks or hedgacenta, but I can't believe the size of it. It's enormous.
The Scillies are also the first landfall for long-distance migrating birds, some of which are blown off course by strong Atlantic winds.
These gunnery emplacements make a really welcome break from the wind, but they're also giving me quite good camouflage and protection here. While I've been sitting here, swallows have been coming past. Actually, some of the swallows here are looking quite tired. It's not surprising, is it, really, when you think how far they've flown all the way from Africa to here. And you can see that when they sit on the rocks. They haven't got quite that little sparkle that I'm used to seeing when they're on the mainland. But it'll only take them a few days to fuel up on the abundant insect life here on the Scilly Isles before they head further north. You've got to respect swallows. What a journey they make.
I'm making a shorter journey of my own across to the neighbouring island of St Martin's, with a human population of just 142. The wilderness here provides vital habitat to some of the rarest and smallest island species. It also gives me a great sense of the landscape.
What a glorious day. Bit hazy though, I can't see the mainland.
That's 28 miles off.
In that direction, that's Land's End. But I can see all the islands stretched out in front of me here, and once upon a time, these islands were connected to the mainland. That's during the Ice Age, when a great ice sheet came down here. Well, once the ice retreated, we're left with a particularly large island here. And that sat here with a beautiful wooded valley until the year 500, when the sea levels rose, flooding that valley and giving us these islands. Once the glaciers retreated, there were just bare surfaces left here. And that, of course, has been colonised by all of this heather. But the heather here is called wave heather, and it grows in a unique way. What's happening is that on this side of one of the waves, the heather is killed off by the harsh salt spray and the cold wind. It's struggling. But that creates shelter on the opposite side for the heather to grow. And so you get these waves.
The mature vegetation on this coastal heathland provides a safe haven for one particularly rare insect. But to explore this miniature world, I need an expert eye. Ian Beavis has been surveying Scilly's insects for 37 years.
What have we got here then, Ian?
This is the red-barbed ant, which is one of Britain's rarest creatures, found only here on St Martin's and on one heathland in Surrey. And that is its entire British distribution.
Oh, fascinating. And how do they differ from other ants?
They're members of the wood ant family, but they live out on open heathland. And their main distinctive feature is that they are reddish in the middle part of their body and dark on the head and at the back.
So what's actually going on here at the nest?
We're seeing a nest site here with multiple entrances. There's one there and one over there. And we're seeing a constant stream of foraging workers going to and fro with food for their young.
And what will be happening inside the nest?
It'll be rearing broods of workers, and then in high summer they will produce a generation of winged males and females. The females will climb up stems like these dead thrift stems and emit a pheromone to attract the males, and they will then pair off.
And they fly off?
They fly off, but once they've found a suitable place to go to ground, they will shed their wings. They're not needed anymore, and they will go to ground to start a new colony.
The red-barbed ant is not alone in this wild habitat. It has a rival on the island, but there's a curious line which neither species will cross.
Ian, I haven't seen any of the red-barbed ants for some time now.
No, there's about a 30-yard no man's land between the territory of the red-barbed ant and the territory of the dusky ant, which occupies the rest of the island.
So are we in that no man's land now?
We're in that no man's land now, yes.
So how do they demark that no man's land? Do they leave some pheromones?
They must leave pheromones which deter the opposing species.
And does it prevent conflict between the two?
It prevents conflict between the two. I always like to imagine that there's an invisible sign up there on the hilltop. So you are now entering the territory of the red-barbed ant. Border patrols operate in this area.
So they patrol the borders as well?
Yes, they do. They would defend against invasion.
Wow. Well, let's see if we can find the other species.
Yes.
And see what the enemy looks like.
Oh, and here is a dusky ant, which is wholly dull black in colour, doesn't have the red but the red-barmed antler does.
Completely different.
Yeah.
And so is this one patrolling the border here?
Yes.
Insect war.
Yes.
They are really interesting creatures.
Late March to June is the best time to find a beetle once common across Britain, but now restricted to the southwestern counties.
This is an oil beetle, an amazingly beautiful beetle. It won't fly off, they don't fly. Fantastic thing. Now, it gets its name because it secretes a liquid from its joints if it's disturbed or unhappy. Scientists call it hemolymph, and it's actually poisonous and can cause skin to blister. But that's not the fascinating thing about this beetle. What's fascinating is the life that this beetle has already had. When he first emerged from an egg, in his first larval stage, he climbed up plants to get to flowers where he waited for a bumblebee to come along, and they hitch a ride. And the bee takes them back to its nest unwittingly, where that larvae changes into a grub stage that then eats its way merrily through the food stores, bee eggs, and even some larvae in the nest, before eventually pupating into the fully fledged beetle and emerging into the above ground world. You can see he's warmed up a lot in the sunshine, and that's why he's able to move this fast. So I think what I'll do is I'll pop him back down on the ground. There you go. This shoreline's really interesting. You can see a cross-section of the country being eroded by the tidal action. And that exposes interesting things from time to time. And you can see here a whole pile of shells, small limpets. That is the remains of a Bronze Age meal. That's their rubbish heap, a midden. It may have been rubbish to them, but it's a treasure to modern archaeologists. An Indian in Alaska once told me that when the tide is out, the table is set. That's something that, of course, coming from Britain, we should all understand, because our coastline has always been tremendously important as a source of food. Nowhere more so than on islands like you find here in the Scilly Isles. When I'm hiking around the coastline, I like to use limpets to bolster my food, and that's exactly what I'm going to do for my lunch today. The tides are nearly in, but there's still some limpets to be found here on the rocks. And the secret to getting them is to tap them off with a rock, and you have to sneak up on them, because if they feel you coming, they're clamped down so tightly you can't get them off without breaking them. So what I've done is I've boiled some seawater, and now I'm going to drop the limpets in. That way, of course, they die quickly. We don't want them to suffer. Now I'll boil those in there just for a couple of minutes, then I'll clean them and cook them more thoroughly.
But I'm not the only one looking for lunch. Oyster catchers use their long, sharp bills to dislodge limpets and mussels.
Now, the limpet comes out of its shell, and now I have to clean the limpet of this bit on its back here. This is the piece we don't use, like that. Still quite hot. And I'm going to add those to a rice dish. So it's the moment of truth. Get a little bit of the limpet there, and a little bit of the rice. Only joking. It's lovely. I don't think I have ever seen gorse as dense as this. It's so thick, it's like a giant pincushion. And that provides fantastic protection for wildlife. And you can see that just here. This is where rabbits are going in and out. And the density of the gorse here, combined with the lack of predators, means that the rabbits don't actually build burrows. They literally just go in under the gorse and use the thicket.
Which is just as well, as the thin soil and hard bedrock here makes digging burrows impossible. Rabbits were first recorded on the islands in 1176, but in the 19th century, domestic black rabbits were introduced as a food source for humans.
Hello. Hello. You're not afraid at all, are you? You don't need any binoculars here, you can just look straight down. It's one of the other features of the islands here is that many of the birds are incredibly tame. They haven't learned to fear people. You wouldn't think that was a wild bird at all, would you? Well, talk about bad weather. We've got northeasterlies at the moment that have been recorded today at around 50 miles an hour, so it's pretty unpleasant wildlife watching conditions. But my heart really goes out to the migrant birds that are arriving here, already exhausted from these incredible journeys they've made, to find themselves struggling against this cold, wet and very windy weather. It's a difficult time. I think I'm going to resign myself to a hide this afternoon in the hope that I might see something, but at least there'll be some shelter.
I've arranged to meet local birder Will Wagstaff for an insider's guide to the island's migrants, but I wonder how much we'll see today.
Hey Will, how are you?
How you doing? All right. It's good here, isn't it?
It's a bit bleak, isn't it? So what have you got here today then?
Ducks doing well. Gadwall and mallard here. And there's been swallows here. You can see where their droppings are on the edge. They've been nice little bit of a lip and out the wind, so I guess they were roosting here overnight.
So you get hundreds of birds visiting?
Yes, and we're up to 435 species here. But out of that, less than 60 breed in an average year.
So what's your explanation for the number of birds that you get that visit Scilly with so few breeding here?
I rather like an answer that came out in the 1950s. Somebody said there's a lighthouse on every corner and these birds migrating over, they see it in land.
So the Scilly's are a bit like a service station on a motorway?
Very much so, yeah. In, fuel up and move on again. Don't hang about, get north to breed.
I've come to this campsite in search of a predator of the night, one of our smaller mammals. And the reason I've chosen to come here is twofold. Firstly, it's a fantastic habitat. We've got these really thick hedges and almost a mown lawn. Really good habitat. And you couple that with the fact that some of these campers will inevitably drop some food, and it becomes the perfect place to look for one particular animal. That's the dropping of a hedgehog. It's less than a centimetre wide and it has a tail on it that shows you it's a predator's dropping. And if we were to pick that apart and have a look at what was in there, we'd find lots of remains of insects. You see some shiny bits there, the wing cases and exoskeleton remains. You see quite a few droppings in this area. This area here, in the last few evenings, has had quite intense hedgehog activity.
If I'm to catch a glimpse of these nocturnal creatures, I'm going to have to wait for the sun to go down. I'm told that the hedgehogs here are as comfortable around people as the birds. And this one doesn't seem bothered by me approaching it at all.
When a hedgehog feels threatened, the first thing they do is they push the spines above their heads forwards like a little crest. And if they're really worried, then they hunker down tight like a ball. And you can see he's really quite relaxed. Stunning creature. Now, they've only been here for about 30 years, but they're doing really well. But as a species, they're ancient. On the mainland, they're in decline. We're not really sure why. It could be the loss of habitat, overpredation by other creatures, could even be the effect of pesticides destroying the insects upon which they depend for food. Some say that the numbers of hedgehogs here are causing a problem for some of the birds, but really the jury is out. And for the time being, it's nice to know that there's one place where there's still good habitat. Isn't he beautiful?